Hi there, and welcome to the Caterpillar Cross Stitch YouTube channel. My name is Ford, aka Son of a Stitch. With me, as always, is my co-star and supervisor, Nugget the Parakeet, and today we're going to attempt to demystify fractional stitches. Caterpillar Cross Stitch is all about cross stitch, and we upload videos every week with tons of great tips and tricks to help you get the most out of the hobby. So make sure that you like this video and subscribe so that you don't miss any of that stitchy goodness. As the name suggests, most of the time what we do in cross stitching is make little crosses, little X's. Those little X's all add up to be pixels in what I've heard described as acoustic pixel art. But occasionally you'll encounter a situation or a pattern that requires some finer resolution or some tighter detail than what you can do with all those little squares. That's where fractional stitches can come in. And there are a handful of different kinds of those, and I'm going to go over each of them with you today and show you how to recognize them and how to do them. And don't forget to join the VIP Stitch Club. You'll get 10% off your first order, a free ebook containing 8 cross-stitch patterns, and a digital download with our 10 handiest cross-stitching tips. So click the link down there in the description and sign up for that to get all those great perks. Well, today we're going to be talking about 4 different kinds of fractional stitches. There's a 3/4 stitch, a 1/4 stitch, a half stitch, and a petite stitch. Let's start with the 3/4 stitch. Now, a 3/4 stitch is usually represented simply by a triangle on the pattern, a triangle that divides one of your stitch squares in half, like this. If we think of a regular cross stitch as being 2 lines that bisect one another, we're basically winding up with 4 line segments. 1, 2, 3, 4. In order to do a 3/4 stitch, we're just going to omit one of those 4 segments. So there are 4 orientations that a 3/4 stitch can be in. We've got a top left, a bottom right, top right, and a bottom left. So which corner that stitch is settled into is going to be indicated by the corner that is filled in with your little triangle there. So let me show you how to do one of those. So we've started here with the first half of 3 full stitches. And so then what we're going to do to start our 3/4 stitch is we're going to stick our needle down through the middle of the square for that 3/4 stitch to make the bottom half, and then complete the rest of the stitch there. So we've got 1 full line segment and 1 half of a line there. I usually recommend doing the portion of the stitch that will pierce through the fabric, the 1/4 stitch portion of it, first, because if you try to do that second, you'll already have a piece of thread laying across the top of the fabric, and you'll be likely to snag it, and you'll deform that stitch that's already there, and it will make your stitch less tidy. So start with the 1/4 stitch, and then do the half stitch over the top of it, even if that's not the normal lay order for your stitches. So if normally you would go the other way, you still want to do the 1/4 stitch portion on the bottom, because that will snag the full stitch part when you try to do it, so you don't want to do that. Now you can probably guess, just based on the name and what we just did, what a 1/4 stitch is like. Let's show you how to recognize one of those on a pattern and how to make them. A 1/4 stitch will usually be depicted on the pattern with just kind of a little nubbin like this, or sometimes it will be depicted with a tiny square down in the corner, but that can also mean something different that we're going to talk about later. So if you see a little nubbin like this with a little tiny copy of the symbol that represents the color on the pattern, that's your sign that you're going to be doing a 1/4 stitch there. So let me show you how that's done. So we've got the first half of our group of full stitches here, and then we're going to end with a 1/4 stitch there. And that's really simple. All we're going to do is pierce down right through the middle of the square, but then we're not going to cross that. We're just going to leave it, and then cross all the rest of our stitches. There's also a stitch called a half stitch, which is a little bit different from a 3/4 or a 1/4 stitch. We're still only making half of an X, but instead of being used for the purpose of making finer detail, the half stitch is usually used to create some texture or to create a feeling of movement in the stitch. Let me show you how to recognize that and how to do that. Now, sometimes you'll hear people describe a half stitch as a tent stitch and use the terms interchangeably, but they are actually a little bit different. We're just going to talk about a half cross stitch today, not a tent stitch, which is a special stitch that's used in needlepoint. Now a half stitch can be depicted in one of a couple different ways. One would be just as a little diagonal line on the pattern like this that basically looks exactly like a half stitch does. It's just one part of the stitch. Patterns that depict it this way will usually indicate to you which direction they want that half stitch to go. Bottom left to top right or top left to bottom right. Now some other patterns, the only way you'll know it is a half stitch is by going to your legend page. And on the legend page, you'll see the same color, say 310 black, indicated in two different places. One up here for full stitches, and then another down at the bottom for half stitches. So you just have to very carefully look at that legend to make sure that you're doing the right kind of stitch for them. And stitching a half stitch is very simple. If you normally stitch with the Danish method, it's going to be exactly the same as normally just the first half of your process. You're going to do one diagonal line with however many threads you're supposed to be using, and then instead of crossing them, you're just going to be done. You're just going to not finish them. This can create a nice texture or some transparency to show the fabric, or it can create kind of a fuzzy look for a nostalgic, especially on a full coverage piece. And the final kind of fractional stitch that we're going to do today is called a petite stitch. Again, you'll sometimes hear people mistakenly refer to this as a petit point, but that again is a special kind of stitch that's used in needlepoint and not the same as a petite cross stitch. So I'm going to show you how to do a petite cross stitch now. So we're going to do a couple of petite stitches here. And just like with a quarter stitch, you're going to pierce through the middle of the fabric on your downstroke. And then you're going to come up through the middle bottom. And then you're going to go back down through the middle left. Basically just making a tiny little cross stitch, but only in the corner of the square. So that can let you do more gentle stair-stepping instead of the rough stair-stepping that you would normally get from just doing full stitches. Now that we know how to recognize and make all of those fractional stitches, you might have noticed a problem. In cross-stitching, we usually use blunt needles, like tapestry needles, in order to avoid accidentally poking through the weave of our fabric. But here we're actually deliberately poking through the weave of the fabric. So that can sometimes be a little bit difficult, especially if we are working with a larger needle on larger fabric. So let me show you a little trick that helps me with that. During my accessories video, I mentioned that I use my needle minder for quite a few different things while I'm stitching, and one of them is to keep a sewing pin on hand, because it's nice and sharp and it will allow me to pre-punch the holes that I need to make through the fabric. So especially if I'm doing a petite stitch and I need to go through the fabric several times, it can be very handy to have those holes already made. You can see how much less I struggled making that petite stitch. I want to take a moment here and recommend the Caterpillar Cross Stitch Instagram and Facebook group. There's a really excellent community of stitchers that's grown up around Caterpillar Cross Stitch, and joining those can help you find a whole bunch of support, inspiration, and project ideas. So I highly recommend joining those. Now, a lot of times patterns calling for 3/4 or 1/4 stitches won't actually tell you which one you need to use, and sometimes it's up to you as the stitcher to decide which one is the correct one to use. Let me show you a few things that I use to determine which to do. A lot of times the pattern isn't going to tell you which one to use. It's just going to show you two opposing triangles in opposite sides of the square. That makes it difficult to know which one you should use. Personally, the way I determine whether to use a 1/4 stitch, 3/4 stitch, or a combination of the two, where I would do like a 3/4 stitch in one side, in one color, and a 1/4 stitch in the other, is based on what is in front. What is the focus and what's the foreground element of the pattern. Whichever one you use the 3/4 stitch of is going to be bolder. It's going to have more of the color in the square. It's going to be emphasized. So you use whatever is in the front because it will seem to be laying on top of the other thing. Now sometimes you'll also have a backstitch line that will divide those two segments. And if that's the case, then I just do a 1/4 stitch in each of the corners and let the backstitch line fill in the rest of that square and complete the division between the two colors. Well, that about does it for this time. If you have a tip that I didn't cover, leave it in the comments down below. For Caterpillar Cross Stitch, I'm Ford. This is Nugget. See you next time.